Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, October 11th, 2024, and today we're going to be talking about the 2024 presidential election from the perspective of battleground swing districts. Districts that receive polls just maybe once or twice in an election cycle that provide genuine insight as to how a state might be going on the presidential level and what our national forecast and national outcome might actually be come November 6th, 2024. Now on your screen right now is a local poll that was conducted in the state of Pennsylvania in the 10th Congressional District. There was a poll conducted here that discussed the two congressional candidates after their debate in the congressional district that has been closely watched by many people on both the left and the right because it is a battleground district ultimately. But when it comes down to the presidential level is something that I'm a bit more interested in when it's broken down to how people are voting at the top of the ticket rather than just on the level of Congress. When we're taking a look at national numbers, a big thing that we tend to miss is how some of these swing districts actually feel about individual races, how Harris might be performing in a swing district versus a swing state versus the national swing. It all comes together, but it all tells us a different piece of the story. Now, the numbers here we can find are pretty much summarized as according to what we have seen on our screen right now. Muhlenberg College did this poll in the 7th district. So this one was done in the 10th, rather. I'll show you the 7th one in just a moment. What we found here was that the Democrats maintained a pretty significant advantage in this Pennsylvania 10th district. And when it boils down to what we've been finding, when it comes down to the presidential race, the Democrats are seeing that the 48 to 39 advantage is narrower when it comes down to the presidential level, 46 to 41. But here's the killer for Republicans. They look at this and say, okay, maybe we're doing well, but this 10th district actually went to Trump by 4% in the last race. A pretty significant shift, and one that tells us the 10th district here is a bit more in favor of the Democratic Party. Another thing that I find to be quite interesting is this 7th district poll as well, where the most recent congressional race probably can serve as a bit of an indicator as to how this district actually has shifted pretty much over time. The 7th District, Muhlenberg College, did this poll of likely voters in this congressional district. Kamala Harris maintains an advantage of roughly 3 points in the state. In the congressional race, though, the Democrats hold a lead with Susan Wild, the incumbent here, by roughly 6 points. Now, this 6-point advantage is also impressive. When it comes down to the congressional race on its own, it does show that Democrats have been making inroads when it comes down to voters in congressional districts that they were in a much more competitive position before, back in 2022. But it's that presidential number that I find to be interesting when we look at states like Pennsylvania in that 7th district when Susan Wild only won by 2 in the last race. If Harris is up by 3, that's an improvement off of 2022. And what do we remember about the state of Pennsylvania in 2022 was that John Fetterman won by roughly 5 points across the state. It was a pretty substantial victory. He won in the 7th district. He won in the 10th district. We found improvements for Senator John Fetterman compared to Joe Biden, and a lot of that was forecasted by some of the swing district numbers. And what we can see too, in Pennsylvania's 10th district, Scott Perry, the Republican incumbent, maintained an advantage of roughly 8 points in the state. This is an 8-point state that now we are seeing Democrats in a good position to flip the district. Granted, Scott Perry, someone who is very much associated with Donald Trump, very close to the Trump campaign, if he's going down, then so is Donald Trump. And so that's really how we're starting to see and really gauge a lot of this electorate specific to Pennsylvania because of what it has told us in the past. Now, we don't remember talking about swing district polling in 2016. It didn't make sense because my channel didn't exist back then. But even when it came down to the national figures and even the people talking on the mainstream media, on major forecasting sites, major podcasts, whatever it might be, the one thing that we really saw omitted was this entrance of swing district polling that actually showed some substantive warning signs for Hillary Clinton back in the 2016 election. Now, in 2016, the election was held on November 8th, 2016. And in the days leading into that election, we saw that the New York Times and Siena College released some polls conducted in swing district alongside many others too that you can look at and see as warning signs for the Clinton campaign. For instance, the New York 22nd district here, they did a poll showing Trump ahead 46 to 32. It was a district where Obama and Romney largely tied in 2012, both at 49%. 46 to 32, that shows a pretty substantive improvement for the Donald Trump campaign compared to Mitt Romney's numbers. These were the early warning signs that Hillary Clinton might have actually been on track for a defeat in her states. Despite what the national numbers were saying, despite what the statewide numbers were saying, when it came down to minuscule data points and really honing in on those swing districts, we found the results to be pretty clear-cut, 46 to 32. It's the same thing that Dave Wasserman brought up 4 years ago, back in October of 2020, saying the district-level polls showed flashing red warning signs for Hillary Clinton in the heavily white working-class districts, this being a prime example. And he went at length in 2020 about how a lot of district-level polls were brought up for reconsideration in 2020 after being ignored in 2016, ignored in 2012, ignored in 2008. It wasn't that these polls didn't exist, but nobody knew to look at them. And only more recently have we seen a focus on it. I mean, this is one of my first few times discussing at length swing district polls, largely because these district polls haven't always been things at the forefront of my radar, right? There's always been some national numbers, but now what we're starting to see is that the national numbers really aren't fluctuating. The leads for the swing states have rarely gone back and forth over the past 2 months, and we aren't seeing anything substantive beyond what we've already discussed. Kamala Harris holds the Rust Belt. Donald Trump leads in the Sun Belt. It's the same story told over and over again, but it's a very interesting one when you look at it from a more narrow lens that actually provides a bit more insight. And so continuing in here, Dave Wasserman says the truth is the majority of presidential race polling is conducted at the district, not state or national level. Most of it is never made public by parties and PACs, but it's of high quality because it's conducted to make critical resource allocations decisions in House races. All in all, these polls are conducted in the battleground districts because people need to know, do we invest in this race from the D trip? Does the RNCC invest in this race? And equally, because it's more localized and you're talking to large groups of voters that represent a smaller version of a sample size here for the Republican and Democratic Party, you're going to find that those results tend to be a little bit more accurate. Just as in 2016, they did show those warning signs despite right around this time, national polls and swing state polls saying everything is okay on the Hillary Clinton side of things. And so it really has been quite interesting, watching all of these things. He says in 2020, how do we know Trump isn't getting anywhere near his 16 margins in Michigan and Pennsylvania? Follow the money. Even Republican groups are seeing and releasing surveys showing Trump slipping badly in key battleground districts and making spending decisions accordingly. Now, this time, we are seeing Donald Trump yet again slip in these battleground districts. Kamala Harris leads by a point more than Susan Wild did in her 2-point race in 2022. She now leads by 6. You also are finding the Senate race is pretty substantive for Democrats, running alongside even that congressional race for Republicans. Another poll out of the state of Pennsylvania, that 10th congressional district. What was a, victory for Republicans of 8 points in 2022 is now expected to be a 9-point victory for Democrats. A massive swing that is translating to the top of the ticket ballot numbers here, showing Kamala Harris with the advantage in this state. Ultimately 46 to 41. The numbers here are showing signs of slipping for Donald Trump. And Nebraska's 2nd district is another perfect example of how Kamala Harris, when it comes down to district-wide polling, is doing far better than what some of the national numbers might be saying. Because if I was to take a look at those national numbers and extrapolate that to the battleground states, or even some of the statewide numbers we've been seeing in these battleground states, Nebraska 2nd has one of the most high-quality pollsters coming in and out of these districts constantly. You have people going into this district, surveying residents, figuring out how it's going to vote, because it is a competitive district, and a lot of people genuinely are invested as to how this district might vote. And so you're seeing that the numbers coming out of it in a minute area, in an area that is receiving so much media attention, so much campaign attention, so many pollsters polling a district that's arguably less than 1 million people, you're finding that the results here are showing an improvement for Kamala Harris that is absolutely noticeable. You can see that in this district, if we're taking a look at the recent polls conducted, it's pretty substantive. Harris leads by 9 points in the most recent one. CNN SSRS shows Kamala Harris with an 11-point advantage in this district. And why does that matter? Joe Biden won the district by roughly 7 points in the last race. It's been a very clear trend line that, especially in these areas where suburbanites do make up a significant portion of the electorate, that white working class voters make up a significant portion of the electorate, Kamala Harris, despite doing, slightly worse than Biden, but still maintaining her lead in the Rust Belt in these battleground states, you're seeing that on the district level, Kamala Harris really is doing quite well. It's the districts that you least expect to give Kamala Harris that boost in support and an overall general sentiment that voters feel okay saying they're voting for Kamala Harris, saying that they're excited to vote for Kamala Harris, that this is the first time they're voting for a Democrat. You are seeing so many different takes and things being done in these districts, and it's really only being captured in by the swing district polls, which is really just the most fascinating part of it all. You can see it too, that Kamala Harris, when it comes down to this most recent Maine 2nd district, now this was back in September. I don't think Kamala Harris is going to win Maine's 2nd district, but what did we find? In Maine's 2nd district amongst voters, Donald Trump was losing across the state of Maine significantly. But when you're looking at this 2nd district, you're taking a look. Ultimately, Kamala Harris should be losing this district by 10 points based on what we're seeing nationally. When you see those national numbers, Kamala Harris only up by 2-3 points nationwide, when Biden won by 4.5, a universal standard here would be saying that Maine's 2nd district is going to shift about 1.5 points to the right. Well, remember back in 2020, Donald Trump won the district by 7.4%. What are the numbers telling us in Maine's 2nd district? That Donald Trump leads Kamala Harris by roughly 7 points. And when you take a look at that 1st district, Joe Biden won it by 23. What are we finding in the same poll? That Kamala Harris leads by 28. A massive improvement compared to 2016 even, where that 1st district only went to Clinton by 14.8, and Maine's 2nd went to Trump by 10.3. Nebraska's 2nd also went to Trump by 2.2. It was these districts that revealed it all, and when they're being polled in states like Pennsylvania and states like Nebraska and states like Maine, and they show us a general trend line here where not one is showing Kamala Harris underperforming Joe Biden in this state or underperforming Joe Biden in the battleground district, that really does matter. Because it brings us back to 2022. When we remember that all the national numbers were naysayers, but these individual districts actually did tell us a different story. And that's why it was covered. It wasn't just 2022, it was 2020 and it was 2016 where we saw these lines here. For instance, this New York 22nd poll, they did it again in 2020. What happened? Biden took the lead. Biden took an advantage in this district. He turned it from being Trump, Trump not took a lead. He was on par with Trump. I think it was a tie or Trump led by 1 point, but ultimately it was a 15-point swing from the last time we saw them polled. Joe Biden took an advantage by 1 point. And so it was a 15-point swing. I'm completely mixing up my numbers here. Point being, Biden led by 1. We saw that advantage largely translated into what we could likely see in many battleground states, that white working class voters were moving back to Biden, that they were now going to win them in the same way, and that's exactly what happened. Now, granted, he didn't have a 2012-style victory. New York even went to Obama by 28. Biden only won the state by 23. But when you're taking a look at what that shift meant, it meant a difference between this map and this map. It meant a shift in these battleground states, which took states like Wisconsin and made them 1.4% more Democrat. Michigan made it 3 points more Democrat. Pennsylvania made it 2 points more Democrat. And it also left indicators in states like Georgia, which made it 5.3% more Democrat. Colorado, 8.6% more Democrat. These shifts here were largely predicted by one individual set of polls. And they were constantly this, overall swing district polls that rarely receive any national attention, but do tell a story in a very different way. And honestly, they remind me a lot about special elections that have taken place between now and going all the way back. Special elections that have taken place that have shown Kamala Harris on track for a pretty substantive victory. I mean, it is these district polls and the special elections that really do question this massive lead that Donald Trump supposedly is roaring back to. The Trump team sent out a memo and released their own internal data points showing that amongst Fabrizio Lee and Associates, which is a Republican poll here, they're saying that Donald Trump, they do the Donald Trump internals, Donald Trump leads in every battleground state. I mean, they are trying to skew this and say that Donald Trump is maintaining an advantage. Why? Because they are losing voter confidence amongst the Republican base. They're losing confidence from the GOP donors. They're trying to reiterate, no, we can win this, and not only can we win it, but we are winning it. But it is these more individual, more localized, more accurate polls in these areas where it does matter for the congressional races, the Senate races, and of course the presidential race that are almost all, with limited exceptions, if not any, showing Kamala Harris making an improvement off the last election. And that, I think, can speak to her strength in these Rust Belt states like Wisconsin, like Michigan, like Pennsylvania, when you're seeing those numbers out of Pennsylvania. And you're seeing stronger numbers out of Wisconsin and Michigan than you're seeing in Georgia and North Carolina and Arizona, and in some cases, even Nevada. You are seeing numbers here that are quite good for the Democratic Party. And should these trends hold up, Kamala Harris would have no problem winning the election. And while I don't think that's going to be the reality, I do think Pennsylvania, because of the heavy investments from Democrats up across the ballot, Kamala Harris on track to outspend Donald Trump in the state very narrowly, but still a heavy investment state from both Democrats and Republicans, but Democrats still are able to maintain ground there. I think what we're finding in states like Pennsylvania, in states like Michigan, in states like Wisconsin, is that the numbers here are pretty good for Kamala Harris because the statewide numbers are reflective of what we're seeing in some of these swing districts. And not to mention the fact that the swing districts are able, again, to capture in that voter sentiment that statewide polls and national polls can't always do. They bring in large groups of people for individual districts, a smaller group to pull from, the same size sample. You're going to find that the results tend to be more accurate. And again, they've been quite consistent in favor of the vice president. And so all in all, I will say, just keep an eye out for some of these district polls, especially as we enter into the final stretch of the campaign season. It was that one poll that Dave Wasserman tweeted about on November 3rd, 2016, 5 days before the election, that suggested something that likely could have changed the outcome of the presidential campaign, should that advice have been listened to in that final stretch or maybe even earlier on. These numbers tell us a story. They tell us a story that may be wrong at the end of the day, but so far have been quite right. And based on what we're seeing on the national level, Kamala Harris maintains an advantage. But when it comes down to these district polls, the advantage seems a little bit more pronounced. And maybe that's where we are. Time will tell. I'm very fascinated to see how accurate these district polls end up being. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.